They called him the Devil of Chicago. Luciano Valenti wasn't just a Mafia don. He was a force of nature. And he never walked alone. By his side was Titus, a 150-pound cane corso that the underworld whispered was possessed by a demon. Grown men wet themselves when that dog growled. Assassins dropped their weapons just to run from it. Nobody could get within 5 feet of Luciano without risking their throat. Until one night, a broke, trembling waitress named Clara did the unthinkable. She didn't run. She didn't scream. She did something that silenced the entire room and changed the history of the Valenti crime family forever. This is the story of how a waitress tamed the beast and the monster who held the leash. The Gilded Cage wasn't just a nightclub. It was neutral ground for the predators of Chicago. The velvet ropes were thick, the champagne was vintage, and the air always smelled of expensive perfume and suppressed fear. Clara Evans adjusted her apron, her hands trembling slightly. It was her 3rd shift. She needed this job. Her father's medical bills were piling up on the kitchen counter like a paper tombstone, and the tips at the diner in the South Side weren't cutting it. Here, a single tip could pay for a week of dialysis. Table 4, the floor manager, a sweaty man named Rick, hissed into her ear. And for God's sake, don't look him in the eye. He didn't have to say who sat at table 4. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees whenever Luciano Luke Valenti walked in. He was the capo of the Valenti outfit, a man with eyes like shattered ice and a jawline that looked carved from granite. He wore a 3-piece suit that cost more than Clara's entire existence. But it wasn't Luke that made the room hold its breath. It was the shadow at his knee. Titus. The massive cane corso was a legend in his own right. Jet black, with cropped ears and muscles that rippled like steel cables under a sleek coat, the dog was a weapon. Rumor had it, Titus had torn out the throat of a rival hitman in an elevator last spring. He wore a thick leather collar studded with platinum, but no leash. Luke didn't need a leash. The dog's loyalty was absolute, and his aggression was indiscriminate. Clara balanced the tray of crystal tumblers and a bottle of scotch that cost $3,000. She took a breath, steeling herself. Just do the job. Pour the drink. Walk away. She approached the VIP booth. Luke was in deep conversation with a man Clara recognized from the news, Senator Sterling. The senator looked pale, sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning. "The unions are squeezing me, Luke," the senator whispered. "I can't push that permit through yet." Luke didn't speak. He just tapped his ring against the glass table. Clink, clink, clink. At the sound, Titus, who had been lying like a gargoyle at Luke's feet, let out a low rumble. It vibrated through the floorboards, traveling up Clara's legs. It was a sound of pure primal violence. Clara stepped forward. "Your scotch, Mr. Valenti." Her voice was steady, but her hand betrayed her. As she reached over to set the glass down, a drunk patron from the neighboring table stumbled. He was a heavy-set man laughing at a joke, and he careened backward, bumping hard into Clara's shoulder. Disaster. The tray tipped. The $3,000 bottle of scotch launched off the tray. Time seemed to slow down. The bottle shattered against the edge of the table, spraying amber liquid and shards of glass everywhere. Some of it splashed onto Luke's pristine Italian leather shoes. But worse, a shard of glass skittered across the floor and nicked the paw of the sleeping giant. Titus didn't bark. He exploded. The dog launched from a resting position with terrifying speed. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. The senator scrambled back, knocking over his chair. Titus wasn't going for the drunk man. He was reacting to the sudden chaos near his master. He lunged straight for Clara, a black blur of teeth and fury. "Titus Buster!" Luke shouted, but the command was a fraction of a second too late. Clara didn't scream. She didn't run. If she ran, the prey drive would kick in, and she would be dead. Instinct took over an instinct she hadn't used in 6 years. She dropped to her knees, lowering her center of gravity, and bowed her head, exposing her neck, the ultimate sign of submission in the canine world. But she didn't just submit. As the 150-pound beast slammed into her, knocking the wind from her lungs, she didn't flint. Titus stood over her, his massive paws pinning her shoulders to the glass-strewn floor, his jaws snapping inches from her face. His hot breath smelled of raw meat. The growl was deafening, a chainsaw revving next to her ear. The entire club was silent. Even the music had cut out. Luke was on his feet, his hand reaching inside his jacket for a gun he prayed he wouldn't have to use on his own dog. "Don't move," Luke commanded the room, his voice lethal. But Clara wasn't listening to Luke. She was looking at the dog. Not in the eyes that was a challenge. She looked at his chest, her body entirely limp. "Easy, tesoro," she whispered. The word slipped out unconsciously. "Treasure." She made a specific sound, a soft, rhythmic clicking with her tongue, followed by a long, exhaling sigh. It was a sound used to lower the heart rate of traumatized animals. Titus froze. The snarl died in his throat. Clara slowly, agonizingly, slowly, lifted one hand. The crowd flinched. Luke took a step forward, terrified the movement would trigger the kill. Clara didn't strike. She didn't push. She placed her hand flat against the dog's thundering chest right over his heart. She began to hum, a low, vibrating hum that matched the frequency of the dog's growl, then slowly lowered in pitch. The change was instantaneous and shocking. Titus's ears flicked back. The rigid tension in his muscles dissolved. He lowered his massive block of a head sniffing Clara's neck. He didn't bite. He inhaled her scent deep into his lungs as if he were trying to memorize her soul. Then, to the absolute horror and confusion of everyone in the gilded cage, the devil's Pitbull let out a soft whine and licked the scotch off Clara's cheek. Clara let out a shaky breath, her hand moving up to scratch the thick spot behind the dog's ears. "You're okay," she whispered. "You're just a good boy doing a bad job." Titus sat down on top of her legs, effectively pinning her but now facing outward, barking once at the drunk man who had caused the accident. He was protecting her. Luciano Valenti stood over them, his gun halfway out of his holster, his face a mask of stunned disbelief. He had spent $50,000 on trainers. He had seen Titus bite through a Kevlar sleeve. Nobody touched Titus. Nobody. "Who the hell are you?" Luke asked, his voice low and dangerous. Clara looked up, her blue eyes wide and terrified now that the adrenaline was fading. She realized she was lying on the floor with a mob boss's dog and had just ruined a fortune in liquor. I'm sorry about the scotch," she stammered. "I'll pay for it. Please don't fire me." Luke looked at the shattered glass, then at the dog who was currently resting his chin on the waitress's shoulder. A slow, predatory curiosity ignited in his eyes. "Get up," Luke said. Clara tried, but Titus growled at Luke. Luke's eyes widened. His own dog had just warned him off. "Titus, down," Luke commanded. The dog ignored him. Clara patted the dog's flank. "Release," she said softly. Titus immediately stood up and trotted back to his spot under the table, sitting like a perfect soldier, waiting for her next command. The silence in the room was deafening. Rick, the manager, rushed over, pale as a sheet. "Mr. Valenti, I am so sorry. She's new. She's fired. Get out of here, Clara." "She's not fired," Luke said, his voice silencing Rick instantly. He stepped over the broken glass and stood inches from Clara. He smelled of tobacco, gunpowder, and expensive sandalwood. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a money clip, and dropped a stack of $100 bills onto Clara's tray. "Clean this up," Luke said, his eyes never leaving hers. "And bring me another bottle. You personally. No one else approaches this table." Clara nodded, too scared to speak. As she hurried away to the bar, her heart hammering against her ribs, she could feel his gaze burning a hole between her shoulder blades. She thought she had survived the encounter. She was wrong. She had just auditioned for a role she never wanted. Clara finished her shift in a daze. Every time she walked past table 4, Titus would thump his tail against the floor, a sound like a heavy book dropping. Luke didn't speak to her again, but he watched. He watched how she moved, how she handled the other customers, how she flinched when the bouncers raised their voices. By 3:00 a.m. the club was empty. Clara changed into her worn-out jeans and oversized hoodie, exiting through the back alley to avoid the drunk patrons loitering out front. The Chicago wind was biting, cutting through her thin coat. She checked her phone. 2 missed calls from the hospital. Her stomach dropped. Her dad. She started walking briskly toward the bus stop. The streets were dark, wet with rain. She had that prickling sensation on the back of her neck, the feeling of being hunted. A black SUV with tinted windows rolled slowly alongside her. Clara's grip on her pepper spray tightened. She kept walking. The car matched her pace. The passenger window rolled down. It wasn't Luke. It was a man with a scarred lip and a neck as thick as a tree trunk. This was Rocco Luke's actual head of security. "Get in, Miss Evans," Rocco said. "I'll take the bus, thanks," Clara said, her voice trembling but firm. The back door clicked open. It wasn't a request. From the darkness of the back seat, a familiar low rumble emerged. "Titus." Clara hesitated. If they wanted to hurt her, they would have done it already. And she knew dogs. A dog like Titus didn't growl at someone he wanted to welcome. He was growling at Rocco, impatient to see her. "Mr. Valenti wants a word," Rocco added. "He's paying for your time, and your father's medical bills." Clara froze. She hadn't told anyone about her father. "How do you know about that?" "Mr. Valenti knows everything," Rocco said simply. "Get in, or the hospital stops treatment tomorrow morning due to payment irregularities." It was a threat wrapped in a velvet glove. Clara got in. The interior of the SUV smelled of leather. Luke was sitting on the other side, scrolling through a tablet. Titus was in the middle. As soon as Clara sat down, the massive dog laid his heavy head on her lap. "Good evening, Clara," Luke said without looking up. "You threatened my father." Clara accused her fear giving way to anger. "Who do you think you are?" Luke finally looked at her. In the dim streetlights passing by, his face was unreadable. "I am the man who is going to solve all your problems, if you solve one of mine. I'm a waitress. I drop drinks. I don't solve mob problems." "You're not a waitress," Luke corrected. You're a ghost. Clara Evans, former veterinary student at Cornell, top of your class, dropped out 2 months before graduation when your father, Marcus Evans, was diagnosed with renal failure. You've been working 3 jobs to keep him alive. Clara felt exposed naked. What do you want? Luke gestured to the dog. Titus is difficult. He is trained to kill, to protect, and to intimidate. But lately he has become unmanageable. He bit my housekeeper last week. He nearly took the arm off my consigliere yesterday. My security team wants me to put him down. Clara gasped her hand instinctively, covering Titus's ears as if he could understand. You can't. He's not crazy. He's stressed. He's working too hard. Look at him. His cortisol levels are probably through the roof. Luke raised an eyebrow. Exactly. He doesn't listen to anyone, except you. For some reason, the goddamned dog thinks you're the Virgin Mary. So I'm offering you a job. You will move into my estate. You will be Titus's primary handler. You will feed him, walk him, and make sure he doesn't eat my business associates. In exchange, I pay off your father's medical debt in full, including the transplant he needs. Clara stared at him. It was a deal with the devil. Moving into the Valenti estate meant entering a world of violence, crime, and silence. Once you went in, you didn't just walk out. And if I refuse, then I drop you off at the bus stop, Luke said coldly, and Titus gets a lethal injection tomorrow morning because I cannot have a liability guarding my house. He was bluffing. Or was he Luke Valenti, didn't become the boss by being sentimental? Clara looked down at the dog. Titus looked up at her with soulful amber eyes, pressing his wet nose into her palm. He was a killer, yes, but to her, he was just a soul in need of guidance. I have conditions, Clara said. Luke smirked. It was a terrifying expression. Everyone always does. Name them. I want a contract. For my dad's care. Irrevocable. Even if I mess up. Or if I leave. Done. And I don't participate in your business. I handle the dog. I don't cook for your crew, I don't clean your guns, and I don't see anything I shouldn't see. Luke leaned closer, intruding on her personal space. The air crackled with tension. Clara, in my house you see what I allow you to see, but I agree, you are there for the dog, nothing else. Then I accept. Luke tapped the partition glass. Drive Rocco. As the car sped toward the opulent suburbs of Lake Shore Drive, Clara realized she had just made a terrible mistake. She wasn't just taming a dog. She was walking into the den of the wolf. What Luke didn't know, what his background check hadn't found, was why Clara was so good with dogs. Why she had dropped out of Cornell, really. It wasn't just money. She was hiding from someone too. Someone dangerous. And by stepping into the spotlight of the Chicago Mafia, she had just put a target on her back. The car pulled up to a massive iron gate. The Valenti estate. It looked like a fortress. Welcome home, Clara, Luke said softly. Titus barked a happy sound that echoed in the dark. But as the gates closed behind them, the sound of the latch clicking into place sounded ominously like a prison cell locking shut. The Valenti estate was less a home and more a mausoleum built of marble and mahogany. It was beautiful, cold, and utterly silent. For the first 3 days, Clara didn't see Luke. She only saw the staff, silent women in grey uniforms who dusted surfaces that were already clean, and Rocco, the head of security, who watched her with the suspicion of a man expecting a bomb to go off. Clara's world had shrunk to the West Wing and the sprawling walled gardens. And of course, Titus. The transformation in the dog was subtle but profound. Without the constant stress of Luke's aggressive energy, Titus began to decompress. Clara established a routine. Precision, calm, predictability. She fed him by hand, forcing him to make eye contact to ask permission. She walked him on a slack leash, correcting him with a soft hiss rather than a yank. She treated him not like a monster, but like a working dog with no job. So she gave him one, watching her. On the fourth night, a thunderstorm rolled off Lake Michigan, battering the estate with rain that sounded like gravel thrown against the windows. Thunder was a common trigger for aggression in high-anxiety dogs. Clara sat on the floor of her bedroom, a room larger than her entire apartment back in the South Side, reading a veterinary journal. Titus was pacing. His claws clicked rhythmically on the hard wood, click, click, click. He was panting, his eyes dilated. "Place," Clara whispered, pointing to the heavy rug by the fire. Titus hesitated. A crack of thunder shook the house. He let out a low, vibrating growl directed at the window. "Titus, place." Her voice was firm but low. The dog looked at her, then slowly lowered his massive body onto the rug. Clara crawled over to him. She didn't pet him immediately. She sat with her back against the armchair, just existing in his space. After 10 minutes, the dog let out a long sigh and rested his chin on her ankle. It was a breakthrough, but the peace was shattered by the sound of the door handle turning. Titus was up in a flash, a snarl ripping from his throat. The door swung open, and Luciano Valenti stood there. He was wearing black slack pants and a white dress shirt unbuttoned at the collar. His sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and ink. He looked exhausted and dangerous. "Easy," Clara said to the dog. She didn't command him to stop. She just reminded him of her presence. Titus stopped advancing, but he didn't sit. He stood between Clara and Luke, a living shield. "He guards you against me." Luke observed his voice, rough with whiskey and fatigue. He leaned against the doorframe, not entering. "In my own house." "He guards the vulnerable against the predator," Clara said, not breaking eye contact. "It's instinct. He senses you're a threat." Luke's eyes narrowed. "Am I a threat to you, Clara?" "You're a threat to everyone, Mr. Valenti. That's your job description, isn't it?" Luke finally stepped into the room. The air pressure seemed to change. Titus stiffened his hackles, raising a ridge of hair along his spine, standing up like a razor blade. "Down," Luke commanded the dog. Titus ignored him. He looked at Clara. Clara waited a beat. She needed Luke to see this. She needed him to understand the hierarchy had changed. "It's okay," she said to Titus. "Friend." At the word friend, Titus relaxed. He didn't wag his tail, but the murder left his eyes. He sat down. Luke stared at the dog, then at Clara. A flicker of something like respect, or perhaps jealousy, crossed his face. "I came to give you this," Luke said, pulling a thick envelope from his back pocket. He tossed it onto the bed. "Your father's transfer paperwork. He's been moved to the private wing at St. Jude's. The transplant list has been expedited." Clara felt a lump form in her throat. She reached for the envelope, her fingers trembling. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. It's a transaction. You're delivering on your end." Luke walked over to the window, staring out at the rain. "Rocco tells me you haven't left the property. Not once. You haven't asked for a day off. You haven't called anyone." Clara stiffened. "I'm focused on the dog. Most women in your position would be maxing out the credit card I gave you, or trying to sneak out to see a boyfriend." Luke turned his gaze, piercing. "But you hide. You hide in this room. You hide in the garden. You walk softly, like you're afraid the floorboards will scream. He took a step toward her. Clara instinctively retreated her back, hitting the armchair. Who are you hiding from, Clara? The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I told you. She lied, her heart hammering against her ribs. I owe money. Debt collectors can be aggressive. I paid your debts, Luke said softly. All of them. But you're still looking over your shoulder. He reached out. For a second, Clara thought he was going to touch her face. She flinched a sharp, violent jerk of her head and raised her arm to block a blow that wasn't coming. Silence. Absolute, terrible silence. Luke's hand froze in midair. His eyes dropped to her raised arm, then back to her face. He saw the terror there. Not the fear of a mob boss, but the conditioned, ingrained fear of a battered woman. Slowly, Luke lowered his hand. His expression shifted. The arrogance vanished, replaced by a dark, cold fury. But the fury wasn't directed at her. Who did it? He asked. His voice was barely a whisper, but it carried more violence than a shout. I don't know what you mean, Clara breathed, lowering her arm, shame flooding her cheeks. You flinched, Luke said. Like you expected me to hit you. I am a killer, Clara. I have done terrible things. But I do not touch women. Ever. He took a step back, giving her space. Was it the father? No, Clara said quickly. My dad is a saint. Then a lover? Luke's jaw tightened. Does he have a name? Clara looked away. She couldn't tell him. If she told Luke Valenti that she was running from Detective Gareth Bain of the Chicago PD, a man with a badge and a reputation as a hero, Luke might use it. Or worse, Bain would find out she was here. Bain had told her once, if you run, I will find you, and if you go to the police, I am the police. If you go to the criminals, I'll raid them and kill you in the crossfire. It doesn't matter, Clara whispered. He's in the past. Nothing is in the past, Luke said. The past is just the thing that waits for you to turn around. He looked at Titus, who was watching Luke with intense scrutiny. The dog likes you, Luke said, changing the subject, though his tone remained heavy. He trusts you because he recognizes a fellow survivor. He was a bait dog before I found him, you know. They used him to train other dogs to fight. He survived because he learned to kill before they could kill him. Clara looked at the massive animal with new eyes. The scars on his muzzle made sense now. We are all just products of what has been done to us, Clara, Luke said. He walked to the door. Sleep well, and lock the door, not because of me, but because it will make you feel better. He left. Clara stood there for a long time, the envelope in her hand. She walked to the door and turned the lock. Click. She then walked to the bathroom and stripped off her shirt to shower. She looked in the mirror. The faint silvery lines of old scars crisscrossed her ribs, remnants of a fall down the stairs that was actually a police baton. Luke was right. She was hiding. But she wasn't just hiding from Bain. She was hiding from the realization that she was starting to feel safer with the monster of Chicago than she ever had with the law. 2 weeks passed. The autumn leaves in the estate gardens turned to fire and gold. Clara had made progress. She could now walk Titus through the main house without him growling at the staff. She had even taught him to speak, a deep, resonant bark on command, and quiet. Luke was around more often. He started taking his morning coffee in the solarium, where Clara did Titus's obedience training. He wouldn't say much, just sit there, reading briefing papers, watching over the rim of his cup. It was a Tuesday when the illusion of safety shattered. "We need to walk the perimeter," Rocco announced. "Boss wants to check the fence line near the north woods. The sensors have been glitching." "I'll take Titus," Clara said. "He needs the exercise." "Boss is coming too," Rocco grunted. The group moved out at 10:00 a.m. The air was crisp. Luke walked in front with Rocco. Clara walked 10 paces behind, with Titus on a long lead. 2 other bodyguards trailed the rear. They reached the north edge of the property, where the manicured lawn gave way to dense forest. The metal fence rose 10 feet high, topped with razor wire. "Here," Rocco said, pointing to a section of the sensor array. "Wires are cut. Doesn't look like an animal." Luke crouched down to inspect it. "Clean cut. Wire cutters." Clara felt a sudden tug on the leash. Titus had stopped panting. His body went rigid, his nose pointing toward the dense tree line beyond the fence. "Titus," Clara whispered. The dog let out a low, distinct woof. Not a bark, an alert. "Mr. Valenti," Clara called out, her voice sharp. Luke stood up and turned. "What? The dog! Someone is there!" Rocco drew his weapon instantly. "In the trees! Down!" Clara screamed. It wasn't a guess. She saw the glint of sun on a scope. A crack echoed through the woods, the distinctive supersonic snap of a high-velocity round. Rocco's shoulder exploded in a spray of red. He spun around and fell. "Cover! Get to cover!" Luke roared. He didn't ting for the ground. He dove toward Clara. He tackled her just as a second bullet kicked up the dirt where she had been standing. They rolled into a shallow drainage ditch that ran parallel to the fence. Chaos erupted. The 2 rear bodyguards opened fire into the trees, their submachine guns chattering loudly. But the return fire was precise controlled, suppressed. Pfft, pfft, pfft. One bodyguard went down, then the other. "Sniper!" Luke yelled, pressing Clara's head into the mud. "Stay down." Luke pulled his handgun, but it was useless against a sniper 300 yards away in the woods. They were pinned. "Rocco!" Luke shouted. Rocco was lying on the open grass 10 feet away. He was alive, clutching his shoulder, trying to crawl to the ditch. Crack! Another shot hit the ground inches from Rocco's head. The sniper was toying with him, or using him as bait. "I have to get him," Luke growled, bracing himself to run. "No!" Clara grabbed his arm. "You'll be killed. That's a professional setup. They're waiting for you to move." "He's my man, Clara. I don't leave my men." "Send the dog," Clara said. Luke looked at her like she was insane. "Titus isn't bulletproof. He's fast, and he's low. They're aiming for chest height." Clara turned to Titus. The dog was pressed against her side in the ditch, vibrating with the need to fight. Clara grabbed Titus's face. The world narrowed down to her and the beast. "Titus, look." She pointed at the tree line, specifically at a large oak tree where the muzzle flash was coming from. "Seek," she commanded. It wasn't a command to kill. It was a command to hunt. "Go." She released the collar. Titus exploded out of the ditch like a black missile. He didn't run in a straight line. He zigzagged instinctually, making himself a hard target. The sniper fired. Crack. A miss. Crack. Another miss. Titus was closing the distance with terrifying speed. He hit the fence 10 feet of steel mesh. He didn't stop. He scrambled up at claws, finding purchase in the lynx muscle, powering him over the top through the razor wire. He landed on the other side and vanished into the undergrowth. For 5 seconds, there was silence. Then a scream. It wasn't a scream of pain. It was a scream of primal terror. A man's voice, high and thin. Then came the sounds of a struggle, branches breaking, the dull thud of a body hitting a tree, and the wet, tearing sound that only a large carnivore makes. The shooting stopped. "Rocco, move!" Luke yelled. Luke scrambled out of the ditch, grabbed Rocco by his vest, and dragged him into the cover of the depression. Clara didn't look at them. She was staring at the tree line. "Titus!" she screamed. "Here! Titus, come!" She had to call him off. If the police came and found a dog eating a man, they would kill the dog. Titus aferku aqui. Movement in the brush. The black shape emerged from the woods. Titus trotted back to the fence. His chest was covered in blood that wasn't his. He was limping slightly on his front left leg. He found a hole the sniper had cut in the fence and squeezed through, trotting back to the ditch. He collapsed next to Clara, panting heavily, his tongue lolling out. Clara immediately began checking him. "Good boy, good boy." Her hands were covered in mud and blood as she palpated his ribs. "Is he hit?" Luke asked. He was tying a tourniquet around Rocco's arm, but his eyes were on Clara. "Graze on the flank. He cut his paw on the fence. But he's okay," Clara said, her voice shaking now that the danger had passed. "He's okay." Luke looked at the tree line where the screaming had stopped. Then he looked at the waitress who was currently hugging a man-eating beast, crying into its fur. He had underestimated her. He thought she was just a soft thing that was good with animals. But he had just watched her calculate a tactical maneuver under fire. She hadn't frozen. She had weaponized the only asset they had. Sirens wailed in the distance. The estate security team was finally inbound. "Clara," Luke said. She looked up, her face streaked with mud. "You saved my life." "I saved the dog," she corrected. "If you died, they'd put him down." Luke stared at her. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a cold clarity in its wake. He reached out and wiped a smudge of blood from her cheek. This time, she didn't flinch. She was too exhausted to be afraid. "Let's get back to the house," Luke said. "War has started." As they loaded Rocco into the arriving SUV, Clara noticed something. She knelt down by the ditch where they had been hiding. "What is it?" Luke asked, hand on his gun. Clara picked up a shell casing that had been ejected from the sniper's rifle. It must have rolled down the hill from a previous scouting mission, or the shooter had been closer than they thought. She turned it over in her hand. It wasn't a standard round. It was a .308 Winchester hollow point. But stamped on the bottom of the casing wasn't a manufacturer's code. It was a custom hand-load mark. A small X scratched into the brass. Clara stopped breathing. She knew that mark. She had seen it on a reloading bench in a garage in the south side. It wasn't just a hit. "Clara," Luke prompted. She closed her hand tight over the brass casing, hiding it. "Nothing," she said. "Just trash." But as she climbed into the car, the cold realization settled in her gut like lead. The sniper wasn't a rival mobster. It was Detective Gareth Bain. He had found her. And he wasn't here to arrest her. He was here to eliminate the competition, Luciano Valenti, and take his property back. Clara looked at Luke's profile as he barked orders into his phone. He was powerful. He was dangerous. But he didn't know that the police were the ones hunting him. She had to tell him. But if she told him, Luke would kill Bain. And if Luke killed a cop, the entire might of the Chicago PD would come down on the Valenti estate, and everyone, including Titus, would burn. She was trapped, and the walls were closing in. The adrenaline of the ambush faded, replaced by a suffocating, heavy silence that draped over the Valenti estate like a funeral shroud. The gates were locked. Armed men patrolled the perimeter in pairs, their breath misting in the cooling autumn air. Inside the estate's dedicated infirmary, a sterile, white-tiled room, usually reserved for stitching up soldiers who couldn't go to a public hospital, Clara was working on Titus. The room smelled of iodine and rubbing alcohol. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, the blood on Clara's hands looked almost black. "Hold him steady," Clara murmured, her voice tight. Luke stood on the other side of the metal examination table. He wasn't wearing his jacket anymore. His white shirt was stained with mud, and Rocco's blood, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. His hands, usually instruments of violence, were currently resting gently on Titus's head and shoulders, keeping the massive dog calm. "He's trembling," Luke noted, his voice low. "He's coming down from the fight drive," Clara explained, threading a surgical needle with steady, practiced movements. "His body is flooded with cortisol. He's not in pain, not really. He's just processing." Clara focused entirely on the wound. It was a nasty gash on the dog's flank, where the bullet had grazed him, and a deep slice on his paw pad from the razor wire. She worked with the precision of the surgeon she was meant to be. Clean, irrigate, stitch, knot. Every time the needle pierced the tough skin, Titus would let out a low whine, and every time Luke would lean down and whisper something in Italian, his forehead resting against the dog's massive skull. "Tranquillo, amico mio. Sono qui. Easy, my friend. I am here." Clara glanced up, catching the moment. It was a jarring contradiction. The man who had put a bullet in a hitman's head 10 minutes ago was now comforting his dog with a tenderness that made Clara's chest ache. But the ache was quickly replaced by the cold, hard lump of brass in her pocket. The shell casing. It was burning a hole through her jeans. Every time she moved, she felt it pressing against her thigh, a physical reminder of the lie she was telling. "You're quiet," Luke said, breaking the silence. He didn't look at her. He was watching her hands work. Clara tied off the final stitch on the flank. "Concentrating." "You did well today," Luke said. "Most people would have frozen. You analyzed the trajectory. You deployed the dog." He paused, his eyes finally lifting to meet hers. They were dark, intelligent, and terrifyingly perceptive. "You moved like a soldier, Clara." Clara swallowed hard, reaching for the gauze to wrap Titus's paw. "I grew up in a rough neighborhood. You learn to duck." "That wasn't ducking. That was tactical awareness." Luke walked around the table, closing the distance between them. "And in the woods, you found something." Clara's heart skipped a beat. She kept wrapping the paw. "I told you. It was trash." You paused. Luke pressed his voice, dropping an octave. "We were exposed. Seconds mattered, yet you stopped to pick something up. You prioritized it over your own safety. Why?" Clara finished the wrap and taped it secure. She patted Titus, signaling he could stand. The dog immediately shook himself, the sound of his ears flapping, filling the tense room, before leaning his heavy weight against Clara's legs. "I thought it might be evidence." Clara lied the falsehood, tasting like ash in her mouth. "But it was just an old, rusted piece of metal. I threw it back down." Luke studied her face. He was looking for the micro-expressions, the tells. He stepped closer, invading her personal space. He smelled of rain iron and expensive tobacco. "You are a terrible liar, Clara." He reached out. Clara held her breath. He took her chin in his hand, tilting her face up to the light. His thumb brushed over a smudge of dirt on her jaw. "Whoever is hunting us, they are professional," Luke said softly. "If you know something, anything that could help me kill them, you need to tell me. Not for my sake, but for his." He gestured to the dog. Clara looked down at Titus. If she told Luke that the shooter was Detective Gareth Bain, Luke would go to war with the Chicago Police Department. He would lose. Bain had the entire force behind him. He would paint Luke as a cop killer, raid the house, and Titus would be shot in the crossfire. "I don't know anything," she whispered. Luke held her gaze for a second longer, then released her. The warmth of his hand lingered on her skin like a brand. "Get some rest," he said abruptly, turning away. "Rocco is in surgery. I have a war council to convene." Clara watched him leave. As soon as the door clicked shut, she sagged against the metal table, her knees giving way. Titus whined and nudged her hand. "I'm sorry, boy," she whispered, burying her face in his neck. "I'm so sorry." She went back to her room in the West Wing. She locked the door, then dragged a heavy chair in front of it. Paranoid, just like she used to be. She went into the bathroom and pulled the shell casing from her pocket. She held it under the light. The scratched X on the base seemed to mock her. Bain. Her phone buzzed. Not the encrypted phone Luke had given her. Her old burner phone. The one she kept hidden in the bottom of her duffel bag, wrapped in socks. The one nobody had the number for, except her father. She scrambled to grab it, her hands shaking. "Dad," she answered. "Hello." "Hello, sweetheart." The voice wasn't her father's. It was smooth dark and terrified her more than gunfire. "Gareth," she breathed. "I missed you, Clara," Detective Bain said. He sounded casual, like he was calling to ask about dinner. "You look good. A little thin, maybe. But the country air suits you." Clara spun around, checking the windows. The blinds were drawn. "How did you get this number?" "I'm a detective, Clara. Finding things is what I do. Finding you was easy once I tracked your father's sudden upgrade in medical care. St. Jude's private wing. Very fancy. Very expensive." "Leave him alone," Clara hissed. "I haven't touched him. Yet," Bain said. "But I did take a shot at your new boyfriend today. Shame I missed. The wind was tricky. He's not my boyfriend. He's a criminal, Clara. Scum. And you're living in his house, washing his dog. It's beneath you." Bain's voice hardened. "I want you to come home." "Home?" Clara laughed, a hysterical, jagged sound. "You broke my ribs, Gareth. You put me in the hospital. I was stressed. We can work it out. I've changed." The lie was so smooth, it almost sounded like truth. "Here is the deal. You're going to open the service gate at the north wall tonight at 2:00 a.m. I have a team ready." "No." "Clara," Bain said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "If you don't, I will pay a visit to St. Jude's. I can pull the plug on your father's dialysis machine. Or maybe I'll just arrest him for insurance fraud. He's weak, Clara. He won't survive a night in holding." Clara felt the room spin. "You're a monster." "I'm a man who wants his wife back." 2:00 a.m. "Clara, or Daddy dies." The line went dead. Clara dropped the phone. She sank to the floor, pulling her knees to her chest. She was trapped. If she told, Luke Bain would hurt her dad before Luke could stop him. If she helped, Bain, Luke, and Titus would die. She looked at the clock. It was 11:00 p.m. She had 3 hours to make a choice that would destroy her life. 1:45 a.m. The house was silent, but it wasn't asleep. The tension in the air was palpable, vibrating through the walls. Clara moved through the hallway like a ghost. She was wearing black leggings and a dark hoodie. She had left Titus in her room, commanding him to stay, with a tearful hug that lasted too long. He had looked at her with confused, sad eyes, sensing her distress. She reached the kitchen, which led to the service entrance. Her hand hovered over the keypad for the back door. "Do it!" a voice in her head screamed. "Save your dad. Don't do it," her heart whispered. "You're killing Luke." She typed in the code. The light turned green. "Going somewhere." The voice came from the shadows of the pantry. Clara gasped, spinning around. Luke was sitting in the dark at the breakfast nook, a tumbler of whiskey in his hand. He hadn't turned on the lights. He was just a silhouette of broad shoulders and lethal intent. I couldn't sleep," Clara stammered. "I wanted warm milk." "In a jacket?" Luke asked. He stood up. "And boots." He placed the glass on the table with a heavy thud. "I know you lied to me in the infirmary, Clara. I let it slide because I thought you were just scared. But now, sneaking out at 2:00 a.m. while my house is under siege." He walked toward her. This wasn't the man who had comforted the dog. This was the Don, the predator. "Rocco found your burner phone," Luke said softly. The network sniffers picked up an unauthorized signal inside the house at 11:00 p.m. An incoming call, duration 2 minutes. Clara backed up until she hit the refrigerator. There was nowhere to run. "Who called you, Clara?" "No one." "Wrong number." Luke slammed his hand against the fridge next to her head. The violence of the movement made her jump, but he didn't touch her. He just caged her in. "Don't lie to me." He roared, his control finally snapping. "My men are bleeding. I have a sniper in the woods. And the woman I brought into my home, the woman I trusted with the only thing I care about, is making secret calls in the middle of the night." He leaned in his face, inches from hers. "Are you the mole? Did you signal the sniper today?" "No," Clara cried, tears streaming down her face. "I saved Titus. I saved you. Then tell me the truth. Who called you?" Clara trembled. "If I tell you, he kills my father." Luke froze. The rage didn't leave his eyes, but it shifted. It became focused, calculated. "Who? Please, Luke. He's untouchable." "In Chicago, I am the untouchable one," Luke growled. "Name him." Clara reached into her pocket. Her hand shook so badly she almost dropped it. She pulled out the brass shell casing, the one with the X scratched into the bottom. She held it up. Luke took it. He looked at the mark. He frowned. "I don't know this mark. A hit man." "No," Clara whispered. "A cop." Luke looked up sharply. "A cop. Detective Gareth Bain, Vice Squad." Clara's voice broke. "He's my ex-fiancé. He beat me. For 2 years. That's why I ran. That's why I hid." Luke stared at her, the pieces falling into place. The flinch in the bedroom, the scars, the knowledge of first aid. "He found me," Clara sobbed. "He called me. He told me if I don't open the north gate at 2:00 a.m., he'll kill my dad at the hospital. He's outside right now, Luke, with a strike team." Luke went very still. It was the stillness of a bomb just before detonation. He looked at the clock. 1:55 a.m. "He is coming here," Luke asked, his voice terrifyingly calm. Yes. He thinks I'm going to open the gate. Luke looked at the shell casing in his hand, then he closed his fist around it. He hurt you? Luke asked. It wasn't a question about the past. It was a clarification of the debt. Yes. And he threatened your father? Yes. Luke turned away from her. He pulled his radio from his belt. Security. All units. Condition black. Condition black, copy. A voice crackled back. We have a breach imminent at the north gate. It is not a rival family. It is a rogue police element. Luke's eyes met Clara's. Do not engage with firearms unless fired upon. I want them taken alive. Specifically the leader. Luke, Clara pleaded, grabbing his arm. He's a cop. If you touch him, Luke looked down at her hand on his arm. He covered it with his own. His skin was warm. He stopped being a cop when he threatened my family, Luke said. Clara blinked. Family. You are under my protection, Clara. That means your father is under my protection. Luke pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Get a team to St. Jude's. Private wing. Secure Marcus Evans. If anyone with a badge tries to touch him, break their hands. Move him to the safe house. Now. He hung up. He's waiting for the gate to open, Luke said. Let's not disappoint him. What are you going to do? I'm going to invite him in. Luke said, a cruel smile touching his lips. But he's not going to find a helpless waitress. Luke whistled, a sharp, piercing sound. From the hallway, the sound of heavy paws thundered against the floorboards. Titus skidded into the kitchen, his cropped ears alert, his muscles tense. He looked from Luke to Clara, sensing the energy. Luke looked at the dog, then at Clara. Can you control him? Luke asked. Can you make him hold a target without killing? Clara wiped her tears. She looked at Titus, the beast who had saved her, the beast she had saved. Yes, she said. Good, Luke said, drawing his gun. Open the gate, Clara. Clara hesitated, then stepped to the keypad. Her finger hovered over the unlock button. Trust me, Luke whispered. Clara pressed the button. A buzzer sounded. The monitor on the wall showed the heavy iron gates of the north wall, slowly swinging open into the darkness of the rainy night. Shadows moved on the screen. Tactical gear. Rifles. They were moving in. Titus, Clara said, her voice finding its steel. Guard! The dog let out a low rumble that vibrated the floor. He moved to stand in front of Clara, his body a living barricade. Luke stepped into the shadows of the kitchen, disappearing into the dark. Let them come to the kill box. Clara stood alone in the light of the kitchen, Titus at her side. She was the bait. But this time, the bait had teeth. The kitchen door creaked open. The rain hissed against the pavement outside, masking the sound of boots on tile. Detective Gareth Bain stepped into the light. He held a suppressed pistol, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on Clara. He smiled, a cold, possessive twisting of lips that made Clara's blood run cold. Good girl, Bain purred, leveling the gun at her chest. I knew you'd come to your senses. Where is the mongrel? Right here. A voice rumbled from the shadows. Bain spun around, but he was too slow. Luke stepped out from behind the pantry door, his own weapon raised. But he didn't fire. He didn't need to. Titus, Clara whispered. The single word cut through the tension like a knife. From beneath the heavy oak table, the massive black shape launched itself. But this wasn't the blind fury of a wild animal. This was precision. Bain screamed as 150 pounds of muscle hit him in the chest. He went down hard, his gun skittering across the floor. Before he could reach for his backup weapon, Titus was on top of him. The dog didn't tear his throat out. Instead, Titus pinned Bane's shoulders to the ground. His jaws clamped around Bane's forearm, applying just enough pressure to break the bone if he moved but not breaking the skin. Bane thrashed. "Get it off me! Shoot it!" "Titus, hold!" Clara commanded, her voice steady and absolute. The dog froze, a low growl rumbling in his chest, staring directly into Bane's terrified eyes. The beast was perfectly controlled. Luke walked over, kicked Bane's gun away, and looked down at the detective with a look of utter disgust. "You thought you were hunting a pet," Luke said, crouching down. "But you walked into a den of wolves. You can't touch me," Bane spat, wincing, as Titus tightened his grip. "I'm the police." "You're a trespasser on private property who threatened a woman," Luke said coldly. "And you're not leaving through the front door." Rocco and 2 security guards rushed in from the hallway. Luke stood up and adjusted his cuffs. "Take him, the basement, and call the commissioner. I think he'll be interested to hear about a rogue officer running an extortion racket." As they dragged a screaming Bane away, Clara fell to her knees. "Release," she sobbed. Titus let go immediately. He trotted over to Clara and licked the tears from her face, his tail wagging a slow, heavy rhythm. Luke watched them, the woman and the beast. He realized then that he had been wrong. She hadn't just tamed the dog. She had tamed the chaos in his own home. Hours later, as the sun rose over Lake Michigan, painting the sky in hues of violent orange and soft pink, Luke found Clara on the balcony. "Your father is safe," Luke said, standing beside her. "Bane is handled. He won't ever hurt you again." "I should leave," Clara said, staring at the horizon. "The deal is done. The dog is fixed." Luke turned to her. He reached out his hand, resting gently on the back of her neck. This time she didn't flinch. She leaned into his touch. "The dog is fine," Luke murmured, stepping closer until their breaths mingled in the cold morning air. "But what about the master? You taught the beast to love Clara. Don't you think I need to learn too?" Clara looked up into his dark eyes and saw the vulnerability he hid from the world. The devil of Chicago wasn't asking for a handler. He was asking for a partner. "I don't know if you can be tamed, Luciano," she whispered. Luke kissed her, a slow, searing promise of protection and passion. When he pulled back, he smiled. "Then don't tame me," he said. "Run with me." At their feet, Titus let out a contented "gh" and went back to sleep. The gilded cage was open, but for the first time nobody wanted to leave. And that is how Clara Evans went from a terrified waitress to the queen of the Chicago underworld. She didn't just survive the monsters. She showed them that even beasts need a gentle hand. In the end, it wasn't about the leash or the cage. It was about finding the one person worth fighting for. Gareth Bane learned the hard way that when you threaten the things a wolf loves, you don't get a mercy. You get teeth. Wow, what a ride. I still can't believe she used the hold command instead of letting Titus attack. Talk about character growth. If you enjoyed this story, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss the next episode of Mafia Romance Saga. If you were Clara, would you have let Titus attack Bane? Or did she do the right thing by showing mercy? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.